welcome everybody to the Provider Alliance April membership meeting. We appreciate everybody taking the time today, and especially we appreciate you being flexible with the time change so we can accommodate our guest, Kristen, a little later today. So thanks for joining us. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. We will be using the chat and the Q&A today during the session. So if you have comments or thoughts, please make sure you use those in the chat, or you contact us in the chat, or pose your questions through the Q&A feature. We are going to be running a poll today, so keep an eye out for that. And we are recording today's session, so if you have any issues or you need to bounce off for any reason, just send a message to information@provideralliance.org, and we'll make sure to get you a copy or a link to the session today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick to get us started.
Thank you, Craig. Welcome, everybody. Glad you can join us. I hope you were able to appreciate a little bit extra time in the morning. This meeting's usually over by now, so we'll see how it goes for me. But thank you again for accommodating the schedule change. Something that Kristen had reached out to us and was very interested in meeting with our members, talking about selective contracting that was announced at last week's ISAC. So Kristen will be joining us a little later in the session. We did already have a pretty full agenda, so we're going to, as efficiently as possible, get through everything that we want to talk about, and then we'll have a good segment of time for Kristen to join us and talk about selective contracting. So that will be our final agenda item. There's a few things that we want to cover here in advance. So first of all, Craig, if you can go to next slide, thanks very much. The Mental Health Disability Summit, hosted by Representative, now House Majority Whip Dan Miller, is coming up on May 11th. And again, as you probably already know, we've talked about this quite a bit over the course of the spring, is that TPA will be hosting its annual IDA Awareness and Legislative Appreciation Forum, something we've been doing annually now for, I think, about 6 years. So we are actually going to do that forum on site, taking advantage of the fact that Representative Miller does invite in a number of legislators from all across the state, from both chambers, the House and the Senate. He does hold legislative panel discussions, so it's a good opportunity for you to attend the entire conference, which runs from 9 to 4 p.m. Our legislative event will be a lunch that we will host for the legislators, and we will also host that for members. So you're welcome to come to the forum. TPA members are welcome to sign on for the live meeting and come to the luncheon. So we hope many of you will do that. We're working out some of the details in terms of registration. We won't have room for everybody. We'll have a limited number of tickets. Craig and I went and visited the site yesterday. It's a great room. Rep Miller has not had the conference live at Bethel Congregation for several years, even before COVID. The last Mental Health and Disability Summit that Representative Miller did was at the Pittsburgh Convention Center downtown, because it was the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and he did a really big blowout on that for a full day, had a lot of special guests, and that was immediately before COVID-19 pandemic broke out. So this is going to be the first time since 2020 that we'll be back in a real live format, back at its traditional home in Green Tree at Bethel Congregation. So we're looking forward to the event. We'll have more information coming. As early as possibly Monday, we will open registration. We are planning to do a webinar simulcast. So we know we have members from all across the state. You might be interested in listening in for our luncheon session. I don't believe there will be any streaming of Representative Miller's event throughout the day. I do believe they will be recording and making it available later. But for your participation as TPA members for the luncheon, we'll get you more details on that. And you'll have the opportunity to register to attend in person, as well as attend virtually through a Zoom webinar. If you're planning to go to the conference all day, I'll say please also register directly with Rep Miller on the website. So we're really trying to promote the conference. It is all day. Both Kristen Ahrens will be with us today, and the Secretary, Val Arkush, are going to be presenting in the afternoon session. They're going to be delivering a keynote in the afternoon to kick that session off. So it's a full day. You can see the full event online. We'd really like to see everyone, as many people as possible, attend. We will be participating in the resource fair there as well. So a nice chance to get back in person for TPA members and really for the community at large to get together coming up on Thursday, May 11th. So moving on from there, I'm going to turn it back to Craig and have Craig talk a little bit more about some of the upcoming meetings.
Yeah, so we have a couple of meetings coming up this summer that are going to be sort of unique events. Specifically on July 28th, we'll be hosting our summer conference at the Regional Learning Alliance, where we'll bring some of our colleagues from ODP out to spend the day with us. We're still in the early planning stages of that, but look for some updates on that. It's going to be a great event this summer. June 30th will be our next, will be an upcoming TPA meeting so that we can sort of look at how things are developing with selective contracting and some of the opportunities around sort of continuing to provide some input in that concept. Later this year, we'll be partnering with the Center for Healthcare Solutions on a convention downtown. So more details to come on that. But that'll be a great opportunity for us to work with our strategic alliance with Nick Vizaka and the team at the Center for Healthcare Solutions. So that'll be November 1st and November 2nd. And then we have a couple committee meetings coming up. So on May 18th, we'll be doing our Employment First Committee. And then a little bit off the typical schedule of Thursdays, on May 23rd, we'll be doing our Compliance Committee. We've had a number of them so far. They've all been slightly different, but very productive. So we'll be sending out registration for those two committees pretty soon so that anybody interested in joining, you are welcome to do so. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Patrick to talk about some of the work that we're doing with the other committees as they develop.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I just wanted to comment how well I think that the committee meetings have gone this year. Every one of them I really have felt has been very informative for me. I think it's been great to have members who've participated interact and sort of set their own priorities. You know, I've learned a lot about those priorities in the interest of members. Last week, we had the Care and Support Coordination meeting. I wasn't able to attend. I was out of town, and Craig ran that. And I know the recording's out, but I listened to it. Craig, it was just a great job by everybody, the participants, the ideas that were raised. So we're kind of settling in on, I think it looks like most of the groups are deciding they want to meet quarterly. Once we get through the month of May, we really will have had all of the standing committees meet and sort of discuss this format, talk about what they want to do. We've had a couple of the committees already decide on leadership. We've had people step forward and say they'd like to chair the committee. So we'd like to round that out. And I think even during the month of May, we'll kind of try to look at the schedule, get it on quarterly. Of course, you know, we are very open and welcoming to people running those meetings, setting their priorities, people getting together. But Craig and I will always be there to set up the registrations, you know, do all the back office things, make sure that we give you whatever support as a committee and if you're chairing that. So, you know, please continue to give us feedback. Please participate where you can. And then hopefully we will get a schedule set for the remainder of the year that'll sort of set the dates on these. So I just think they're going really well. And I just wanted to comment on that. And Marisol, I know we have you on here because we did want to cover some things from the Isaac, and Marisol is our Isaac representative. So I know because of the schedule change, we kind of bumped Marisol. She has another commitment at the end of the meeting. So Marisol, just if you want to say anything about the Council on Racial and Social Equity, I mean, that's something I haven't mentioned specifically. Marisol's been sharing that for a while now, I guess probably 2 years, Marisol. So welcome. Let me give you a chance to, you know, just say hi, because I don't know how the schedule is going to unfold as far as when we get to some of those Isaac topics. If there's anything that you want to make sure you call out in advance on that as well, feel free. But hi, Marisol, thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Patrick. I apologize that I won't be able to stay for the full meeting. So I'd asked Patrick if I could just have a couple of minutes of your time to share 3 updates. The first is on the Council on Racial and Social Equity. We met in February, and we've been looking at a priority from the group, which is around workforce development, you know, with the staffing crisis that we're in. So one of the ideas that I've been talking with Patrick about is really consolidating with the work that the Employment First group is doing, because I think we've got a lot of synergies in that. So Give me a couple more weeks and then we'll have kind of a clearer agenda on how that would roll out. But the other update kind of on the council kind of ties with my role in ISAC, and that is that ISAC is starting a special subcommittee on housing, just looking about how to better support housing strategies for individuals with disabilities, and have raised that, looking at it from the lens of how is this available to our BIPOC populations is an important area to look in. So more to come on that subcommittee. I think that will be a really interesting discussion that ISAC is leading. And then, of course, later today we'll be hearing from Kristen on the selective contracting. And I just wanted to share, since I won't be able to be present when that item is being discussed, that I share with Kristen. It's kind of like I was really excited, but also really anxious because it's a big change. But I think here at the TPA, we're in that good spot where we can actually have a voice at the table on how we see this developing, and that we can also provide support to our members on how to get ready for those changes. So we're really looking forward to continuing that discussion with ODP. And what I just wanted to share one comment that Kristen shared as she was presenting the data that really, for me, spoke to the ability for this to really be transformative. And she mentioned that one of the things that she's really looking to do with the selective contracting change is looking at a different way of payment, and that our payment models are always retroactive. So we get paid for the services we provided yesterday to our members, but the work that we do is not retroactive. It's proactive. It's going into the future, because the individuals we serve are with us for a lifetime. So she's really looking into how can this new payment model build in capacity for our providers. So, when we get that call that, hey, I've got 4 acute individuals that need housing support, we're in a better space to be able to bring that into action immediately, because we've already built capacity into our systems, which right now is so difficult to do with our fee schedule. That's it. Those are my 3
Thanks,
updates.
Marisol. Yeah, I see we have a question. What target population mentioned for housing? I don't know if you want to, I know this is ISAC activity, but go ahead, Marisol.
So this is for all populations with intellectual disabilities, but the big concern, of course, is the affordability, because the challenge statewide is the lack of affordable housing for our individuals. But this will serve all populations.
Well, thanks again, Marisol. Appreciate you being there. I'll mention Craig also attended ISAC. We have lots of perspective. Hopefully, if you're able to hang around later, Marisol, and comment on anything as we talk about some of the other ISAC updates that we've put out to membership. But thanks for joining us for that. And so I next want to move to our next guest that I want to introduce here. Welcome, Kathy Hooven from ASSERT, Justice Project Coordinator. We really wanted to acknowledge National Autism Awareness Month, and Craig had been in contact with Kathy and had some conversations about some things that we wanted to share with members. So very happy and glad you could join us today, Kathy. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for including us. Yeah, we're wrapping up April. I can't believe it's already over. Just a little bit about myself. I have spent most of my career in Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system. So I've worked in a juvenile shelter, a detention center, a juvenile boot camp, was a juvenile probation officer in Dauphin County, and then eventually went to work for the Pennsylvania Juvenile Court Judges Commission. While I was working there, my middle son, Ryan, was diagnosed with autism. Ryan is now 21. He is a junior at Kutztown University. One of those things as a parent, you're thinking when they're growing up and they have this diagnosis of a disability, you're like, am I ever going to hear from them? Are they going to live on their own? Yes, he lives on his own, and the only time I hear from him is when he wants money, just like any other typical college kid, right? So a little bit about who ASSERT is. I'm the Justice Project Coordinator for ASSERT. So if you could switch the next slide there, Craig, thank you. This is my Ryan, first and foremost. When we talk about autism, autism is known as an invisible disability. Do you look at my kid and go, oh, there it is. Now I can see the autism. No, in fact, there's this funny meme on social media. It's two moms talking and the one mom very, kind of ignorantly says, wow, he doesn't look autistic. And the other mom is being sarcastic and says, oh, it's the way we part his hair. It's not how Ryan parts his hair when it comes to that autism diagnosis. It is, of course, as you guys know, it is an invisible disability. You can't see it. But a lot of times when we see individuals who are quote unquote high functioning or individuals with low support needs, we have expectations, right? We expect them to behave a certain way, communicate a certain way, and that can really impact them, especially in situations where they may encounter law enforcement, first responders, a medical crisis. They are not going to respond again in the way we might expect, and it can look like a lot of different things. Next slide, thanks, Craig. I've always felt so powerful when you say next slide, right? So here I am. So who is ASSERT? ASSERT stands for Autism Services, Education, Resources, and Training. We are 3 different regions, and each region is sort of tied to either a university or an autism sort of center of excellence. Our Western region works through UPMC through Western Psych. The Central region works through Penn State Hershey Medical Center, and then our Eastern region works out of the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. Next slide. So what does ASSERT do? Well, we bring together local, regional, and statewide resources. We're not providing that one-to-one provider services as many of our statewide providers are. We are trying to point people in the right direction. When Ryan was diagnosed with autism, I left with like this 30-page document and a recommendation of 20 different things that we should be doing. I felt so overwhelmed. I had no idea where to turn, where to begin. Those families can feel very overwhelmed. So how do we help support them? Or those autistic adults who are getting that diagnosis later in life? Reach out to us. We can try to find specifically to your county, where are those supports and services? If they're an adult and they're able to apply for waiver services, that might feel overwhelming. Reach out to us. We have something called a warm line. So you or the family you're working with or the autistic individual, they can reach out to us and call us personally. You can, as somebody who's working with this family, reach out to us, leave us a voicemail, a phone number. We do ASSERT. I'm going to show you a few slides of what our trainings are. We have provided over 14,000 trainings for law enforcement, first responders, justice system personnel. We will train anybody who asks for our training, and we will tailor that training to the content, to the audience as far as time and content. We are, all of our trainings are free. We're supported by a grant, so anything we do is free. Our resources are free. We have a great resource page, and I'm going to scroll through some of those slides to show you some of our resources. If in your job duties, you think to yourself, wow, you know what, a resource that would really help me, the families we're working with, let us know, reach out to us, and we can collaborate and create that resource. And again, everything is free. My favorite trainings that I do are for our actually autistic and ID individuals when we collaborate with the local law enforcement. So you know what? It's great that we're out here training our law enforcement, our police officers, our first responders on autism awareness, on autism advocacy, on autism action. But it also falls on me as Ryan's mom to educate him on what he should do, what he shouldn't do. Maybe you have an autistic individual who, when they get nervous, they put their hands in their pockets. Well, guess what? Police don't know what they're reaching for in that moment, right? So we want to talk to them about how to be safe and to keep them safe. Next slide. When we talk about autism, as we all know, the saying is, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? They are as unique as every one of us. But where we're going to see some similar characteristics or traits are in these areas. Those communication difficulties. My son is verbal. He has been verbal his whole life, but he sometimes takes scripts, lines from movies, memes, things that he's heard elsewhere. And if we don't understand that, when he was little, he would talk like Steve from Blue's Clues all the time. And I would be like, oh no, I don't want to hear Steve from Blue's Clues. I want to hear Ryan. Well, I was hearing Ryan. I just hadn't learned how to listen yet. Now, who would have ever thought I would miss good old Steve from Blue's Clues when now I hear Cartman from South Park or Peter Griffith from Family Guy quite regularly. But again, if we don't understand those communication differences, people are going to respond differently. So that's just kind of a slide about those characteristics. Next slide. When we talk about those social communication difficulties / differences, again, it's going to look different. And for those of us who aren't educated, who aren't aware, especially those law enforcement and first responders, they may not respond in a way we would expect. A friend of mine's son is autistic and nonverbal. He was getting overwhelmed. And for those of us working with autistic people, we know sometimes that deep pressure, deep squeeze looks good, well, or feels good to them. Well, my friend was transporting their bigger son by car with that deep squeeze. He was having a meltdown, wanted to get him in the car, get him home. People saw this, thought that, you know, he was abducting somebody. They thought this was an adult abducting, you know, a young man, a child. He was actually a teenager. And so they called police, you know, followed the car, pulled him over, guns drawn. Guess what? He's like, this is my son. He's autistic, but he's nonverbal. So he's not going to be able to tell you that, hey, by the way, yeah, I'm his dad, or that's my dad. So those social communication differences can really get into difficult situations for autistic individuals, which again is why there's so much importance for that education, that awareness, and that advocacy. Eye contact's another thing. I can tell you that what do we all think in our society if somebody looks away? We think deception, lying, they're not listening, they're not paying attention, right? Well, that's very different for autistic individuals. Eye contact is difficult. So again, just that tiny piece of key to awareness and advocacy. Next slide. That restrictive or repetitive behavior, stimming, for our individuals in that community and our community who aren't educated, who aren't aware to know what they're seeing. It can look like somebody who's under the influence of drugs and alcohol. It can look like somebody who's having a mental health crisis. Their instinct might be to say, stop making that noise, sit down, stop flapping your hands, not being aware that stopping that behavior that autistic individual may be using for coping, for self-soothing, or for just to regulate their body could really maybe escalate that situation. Next slide. Our sensory sensitivities. It's fun when I do these trainings for our local, for our autistic individuals. I always bring a local law enforcement officer with me. And we do some role playing. We explain kind of what you should do, what you shouldn't do if you're in a car and you get pulled over by police, or, you know, if maybe your mom or dad is driving and you're in the car, or you get stopped, maybe you match the description of somebody who just, you know, was involved in a burglary. And so a police officer stopping you. What should you do? What shouldn't you do? These are all great things that we do. But when we open it up to our questions and answers for our police officer, I have done dozens of these trainings. The first question every single time to that police officer is, will you have your lights and sirens on? Because they are already overwhelmed by that sensory input that they are already going to have a difficult time responding. So we want them to understand those sensory sensitivities. That next slide. And in addition to that, you know, that overstimulation, again, what that overstimulation can look like. It can be spinning, flapping their hands, making the same sounds, the same noises over and over again. The reason we want to do these trainings is for that safety. We want people to understand. So I'm just going to have Craig, it's fine. You can just flip through these this is just so you guys kind of see what the training would look like. So those tips and tricks, and then resources. I know we have a ton of resources on our website, and it can be so overwhelming because you get on there like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to look, lady. If you can flip to the next slide, Craig, I think Craig, just kind of keep flipping through them. You can see the different resources we have. We have resources for those visuals, social stories. And many of our autistic individuals do better by seeing, right? Visual. The words Ryan said the most were, I don't know what to expect. So when he knows what to expect, when there is a change in routine, something is different, something is not going as he would expect, that goes a lot better for him to have those social stories. Those are on our website. We have resources for our LGBTQ community. We have resources for, again, visuals, our justice folks, you guys as providers. What can we do to help support you? A lot of resources are on there. There's so much information, like I said, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Have us do the work for you. The support group map, you can click on the county that you live in and go, hey, where are these support groups? I'm a part of a support group here. I live in Cumberland County, and I'm like grandma in the group. Like, right, I got a college kid. Most of these parents have kids that are 4 or 5 years old. But every time I go to that group, I learn something more. So those support groups are such a great place of information. Everything, as I said, we do is free. You guys can reach out to us. We would love to help support you. Any training you're interested in, we will tailor it for time, content, whatever it is that you're looking for. We would love to help support you. Again, like I said, it is free. I'm grateful to be here. Like I said, you know, it was so funny when Ryan was little. I, again, didn't know anything about autism except for the movie Rain Man, which we know is filled with all kinds of terrible, detrimental stereotypes and myths, right? We went from autism awareness, and now we're kind of like autism advocacy. But the big thing now is action. Okay, it's great. We know autistic people exist. They live in our world. Okay, we're aware of that, right? Great. We're going to advocate for them. Yeah, sure. We're going to have this month where we're going to remind people of what they should do, what they shouldn't do. But what about that action? What are we going to do to support our autistic individuals who are unemployed, who are struggling to find places to live? That action is what is so important. You guys took the first step today by hearing a little bit about what we are doing. Please reach out to us and we will help support you in any action steps that you want to take next for the autistic people in your community. So thank you so much for your time today. I know that was really fast. I was trying to get as much in as we can. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We also have a lot of great clinicians on our team, and we'll do some case-by-case consultations if you need those type of supports.
Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll encourage everybody to follow up with you directly. We'll certainly share your information in the slide deck, but we really appreciate you taking the time to explain all that's out there and available and give us that great overview. Thanks again for joining.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, enjoy your weekend, everybody.
Thank you, you too. So I wanted to get into some of the TPA updates. So we'll go a little bit out of order in terms of your agenda today. So I've already talked at length about the 10th Annual Mental Health and Disability Summit that's being hosted by Rep. Miller. We'll continue to promote that, next week being the last full week before the summit. You'll see our planning coming together. We have, I believe, what are we at, Craig? 14 or so legislators coming to our luncheon.
Yes,
we're coordinating.
14.
Okay, and we're coordinating with Rep. Miller's office too. So he has invitations out for his legislative panel discussions to legislators, which is something he routinely does, at least in recent years, at his Mental Health and Disability Summit. So it's just a great program. Take a look at it. You'll hear more from us directly, both about the summit itself and your ability to register to attend the lunch with our PA legislators on that date from noon to 1. So I also wanted to provide an advocacy update. Obviously, that session on May 11th will largely be devoted to our budgetary ask, which is our unified budget request with the other 5 Pennsylvania provider associations. So I just would like to report how well I believe that's going. You know, we worked very diligently throughout the fall into the new year. That culminated with a joint letter to Governor Shapiro on January 26th, which I know we have shared before. We've actually been meeting every week across all the associations here for the last couple of months, I would say. Meetings are being established with various committee leaders, most notably on appropriations right now has been the focus, but we continue to work together very effectively. In fact, I would expect even later today, we have drafted a letter jointly from all the associations to the members of the General Assembly. So somewhat of an update from the letter we sent to the governor on January 26th, but we would like to follow up now directly as we pivot our attention and advocacy to members of the General Assembly. So we'll certainly share that with you as soon as it's ready. From there, we'll probably initiate a voter voice campaign. We'll ask you to reach out to your individual legislators. And May 11th will be a great opportunity for us to convey a lot of this. We'll have some new information. It will be a very brief program. The legislators have a really busy day. This is a 1-hour lunch. We don't expect to take up an hour. We know we need to let them settle in. And we need to give them some time to get back to their sessions and actually be out there to hear from Kristen and the secretary who begin their keynote at 1 p.m. So it won't be a lengthy session, but again, all day long, there will be various activities devoted to mental health in the disability community, a lot of great information and resources. So we really encourage everybody who can attend to participate one way or the other. So the advocacy update, again, sort of encompasses all of that. We stay focused on the original request of the $430 million. And we've agreed jointly that we want to continue to drive the messaging because it is based on inflation and the insufficiency of inflation being calculated in the rates in the first place when they were enacted in January of 2022. And inflation has moved since that date by another 7.2%. So we are now already behind, even if the rates were reflective of actual inflation at the time and didn't contain some of the deficiencies that we pointed out, we would still be behind by 7.2%. So, we'll keep all of this updated information. We want to make a strong case from a policy and economic standpoint for legislators, but we also want to make sure that we're telling stories that are actually representative of the impact people are facing from the inability to receive services due to this depleted workforce and the effect it's having on the capacity of the system. So much more about that in a couple of weeks when we're at the summit. So I also wanted to comment on another joint activity of the associations was a CIS letter that was sent to Kristen Ahrens. Craig, if you're able to post that, we'll remind everybody. I know we've put this out. I've alerted Kristen that this is certainly something that members want to hear from. If she has time today, I'm sure we'll engage her in some discussion about where she's at in terms of the department's response to that letter. She did immediately indicate that she would respond to the letter, so we know it's an important issue. As far as another activity that the associations had undertaken, we actually had prepared a CPS rate letter, which, as it turned out, as we know, the budget that was announced by the governor in March included the extension permanently of the CPS rate. So we never ended up sending the letter to Kristen, but that was something that we had developed. We were ready to send. We had met with Kristen in January jointly on that topic as well. I'm also pleased to report, which we've already put out there and done, that Senators Dillon and Comita have introduced, or at least issued, a co-sponsorship memorandum for an IDA market index bill for DSP services. This would be a companion bill to the House bill that was introduced by Representatives Miller, Markosik, and McCurry, which is a bipartisan bill. We are working to get a bipartisan effort and getting a Republican senator to sign on to the Senate version of that bill. So something else that we will certainly be working toward now, and can certainly use your help if you have relationships within your districts and where you provide services. So I think that's where we are in terms of what we wanted to include on the agenda. I'm going to move to just a couple of what I think are important policy issues. So the next thing we want to show you is really that this happens sometimes somewhat invisibly, but each year the TPA board approves a dues policy, and we'll also post the actual policy into the chat. This is kind of a structural change that's significant, so we want to make sure we give all of our members some advance notice of this. You can download the full policy, take a look at it. It's only 2 pages long. It's a little more clarity than what I'm going to show you here, but historically at TPA, and I'd say in recent years in particular, if you were a provider organization at $4 million in annual IDA revenues or higher, from 4 million to infinity, we had one rate, and then we had a discount rate if you were 4 million or less. For the last few years, we've also had what we had called a subscriber tier for newer organizations who were 2 million or less. So largely driven by a lot of the additional contributions, underwriting, surcharges to support some of our efforts. We really wanted to come up with a schedule that was what we believe to be more fair and equitable. In cases for our lobbying and advocacy efforts to have registered lobbyists, we have had members over the course of the past year contribute between $5,000 and $12,000. Members have pledged as much as $18,000 to $20,000. And while we are greatly appreciative to the members who have done that, we really don't feel that that was a sustainable model going forward. So we want to make this change. I'm going to talk a little bit further in a little bit. We'll do some sort of a workshop where we can bring you in, because another thing that we want to do, and Craig, if you can go to the next slide, again, the full policy is there if you want to take a look at your convenience. But some of the things that we'll call out, as I've already mentioned, some members were paying additionally over and above annual dues to help make contributions and donations to some of our added costs for lobbying and government relations. We also know that some members were paying dues to a couple of different organizations, which we are going to announce here shortly, a strategic affiliation that's going to make a change there as well. And also, we have members that are provider members, but also have affiliated businesses. So if you're in either of the top two tiers, we're no longer going to charge you additionally for that. We're going to add one affiliate for no cost to members that are in the upper tiers. So we know that as an additional offset. We're also working on some additional revenue streams. So we're going to initiate for, I believe, the month of May, a 25% new member discount, but we want to pass that on to existing members as well through a referral program. So we'll have some more details coming out. You can likewise save 25% of the incoming revenues, the same thing we want to do for new members if you were to refer a new member in. As has always been the case, your membership is inclusive of all meetings, all resources, mailing list. As far as some of the enhancements I'm going to talk about in just a moment, one of the things that we are still building out a little bit further and we're going to make some enhancements to are the website. So we'll have some website design and utility information and enhancements that we're going to be in the next 60 to 90 days, be adding some functionality and some changes to the website. All of the invoicing that I've described in terms of the dues policy, it is effective July 1st. We'll probably do some process to sort things out so that, as I mentioned in the past, we would just send one invoice at the top level dues, and it was a responsibility of members to say, hey, we qualify for the discount. We really don't want to do that same process with this new structure. So we'll find a simple, easy way for you to tell us where you are slotted. And remember, this is just your IDA revenue. TPA supports IDA, even though we know a number of you as members participate in other services. When you report back to us, the dues policy and structure is only based upon basically the IDA claims that you get for providing ODP services. So I think with that, I'd like to move on to some of the expanded services. That's really the line item that we kind of included on our agenda today. We wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the enhancements that kind of go hand in hand with what we're talking about in terms of how do we support TPA going forward and how do we deliver value to our members. So government relations and lobbying services, that's something that we've had going on now for close to 18 months. We've seen the benefits of that in terms of the unified activity we have with the other associations. Most of the other associations do have contract lobbyists. The fact that we have one enables our lobbyists to engage with them. So we're working with the Caligari group. David Caligari's actually been coordinating a lot of sessions independent of our meetings with association leadership with the lobbyists. So it's really keeping everybody on the same page. It's also enabling us to sort of divide the state in terms of where we want to provide focus and energy to make sure we're reaching everybody and doing it in a coordinated way so it's very efficient. The data analytics, we've already worked with Center for Healthcare Solutions, as I know you're aware, to generate a wage and DSP, basically a workforce survey. It certainly was more broad than DSPs. That's something that we're going to be able to maintain going forward and do that in a very professional way. Group purchasing platform is also something that we're committed to do sometime over the next 60 to 90 days or so. Grant writing and development is also another area that we've not been able to really accomplish up until now. So we are adding functionality, features, professionalism in order to deliver that. We know there are a lot of grants available to the IDA community that we believe we could access to help do some of these studies, provide better information and resources for members. So that is something that we think is critically important as well. So we also want to make sure we're providing access to a broader health and human services network. Through that, we want to create some more educational opportunities and resources. And Craig at the outset talked about the annual conference and mentioned then that we would be doing this in collaboration with the annual showcase held by and sponsored by Center for Healthcare Solutions. So how are we going to accomplish all of this? So Next slide, please, Craig. What I'd now like to do is bring in our special guest, Nick Vazaka, the CEO of the Center for Healthcare Solutions, and welcome Nick to say hello. And we are entering into a strategic alliance, Nick. So thanks for joining us today, because Nick and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this together, give you a higher level overview, and then set up a workshop sometime in the near future to really devote some real time to this. But welcome, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
So I guess we started this conversation, I don't know when. I always say that anytime something comes together that feels really good and successful, you can never really remember how it started. And I kind of feel that way about our relationship. I know sometime last year we started to have this conversation, and it's just kind of very organically grown from there. And we've already seen, I think, some benefits, and I think members have seen some benefits. And we're using a lot of the analytics in our advocacy to this day. A lot of the infographics have information that came from a lot of the work that Center for Healthcare Solutions did for us. So what would you like to tell us that our members may not already know that I haven't covered here so far? I know you got a lot of exciting stuff going on at your end as well.
Yeah, definitely a lot of exciting things, Patrick. So on the data analytics, I will tell you, we've hired 3 new folks just because of the demand and our capabilities. So we're going to continue to, as you said, provide that analytics for the TPA folks, but expand it and offer more detailed information, more detailed analytics to be able to use not only for your organizations, but also for advocacy purposes, to really put real-time actionable data. It's not going to be old. We're going to collect it. We're going to aggregate it. So more to come on that. But this is what we were hearing from our acute and post-acute folks. So we said, why not just bring that over to the IDA world? So, there's that. There's also, and we talked earlier this week on the group purchasing. So we did have a GPO that was very large. And the hard part was, those larger GPOs, the Vizients of the world and the Intelaires, really don't want to focus on the smaller organizations. So we are in the middle of partnering, very close to partnering. Like you said, 30 to 60 days here, we'll have something out to folks with a group out of the DC. They actually cover DC, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware. And just like we did with TPA, we are in discussions to have a strategic alliance with them and provide the services that they offer to our members. And one of those services is a GPO that's more regional, it's smaller and caters to our nursing homes and caters to our IDA world. So I'm excited about that. And we're also going to expand outside of our healthcare world and go into, school districts, financial institutions, retail. So we're going to just open this up to everybody. Everybody should have the opportunity to use this and save millions of dollars. And not only that, when we partner with this other association, we're going to be able to take advantage of their education, of their webinars, of their committees. So it's only going to expand what we do and bring in folks from the IDA world, from the nursing home world, from the hospital world into a larger discussion. So in the past, where we had committees and groups that were small and intimate, which was good, and we exchanged ideas, and we're not going to go away from that. We're still going to keep those more regional groups. We're now going to participate in a larger discussion that could potentially have, 70, 80, 100 folks from now up and down the East Coast, and hear how things are done in other states, hear how things are being handled in other regions of our country. So we're excited about that. And hopefully, like you said, within the next 90 days, we'll have all that consummated and done and ready to go. And the annual showcase, in the past, it was held in North Hills here at a hotel. And we were limited in terms of size. We're moving that. It'll be November 2nd. It'll be at the convention center. And our goal is to have 12 breakout sessions with a quarter of those dedicated, obviously, to the IDA arena, and then folks obviously in the hospital world and the nursing home world, and in its entirety, just general breakout sessions. So that's where we stand, Patrick. So I'm excited to work with you. And like you said, yeah, we just started a discussion over a cup of coffee, and it grew from there, and it just made sense. We need to collaborate in order to sustain and thrive.
Yeah, great. I mean, all the synergies that you described, I copied this definition on the slide off the internet. I just thought it kind of, for our members to really understand,
Yeah.
I think we get lost in, what do these relationships look like and mean. And so I thought this was just a great way to describe it. It's exactly how we've talked about things. But I see we had a hand raised. David, did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Oh, no, but I'm excited for this partnership, but I'm excited for how it's going to benefit us in the advocacy world. So looking forward to working with both you and Nick. I think it's really going to improve our advocacy. So thank you.
Thanks, David. And as we can go to the next slide, because I think just kind of an extension, these are things, these are kind of the concepts Nick and I have been sort of talking about back and forth. But, one of the things on the data analytics, so first of all, Nick, just when we met, I was really struck by, what I said earlier, if you're paying dues to two separate organizations, we'll both get to that in a minute. But, we do have members that we're paying both dues to Center for Healthcare Solutions and the Provider Alliance. So something I didn't want to say earlier on, but the fact that if you are one of those organizations, Nick and I have worked that out where you're going to pay one time, not twice. We think we're going to deliver as much and more in that regard. And your focus with your IDA members previously, I want to remind our members, how you weighed in on prudent payment with a Pittsburgh Business Times Viewpoint segment that I know you do routinely. So I was very struck by your knowledge of IDA, your support of IDA issues, and before and since we began speaking about this strategic alliance, there's a lot of value, and then the more broad access, the networking, the integrated care model opportunities. There's just so much there that I'm truly very excited about. So with this slide, and the thing I wanted to point out, Nick, when data analytics was one of the first conversations we had. And of course, we did the survey, but our members will know how often we try to get claims data from the state so we can sort of see trends and sort of compare that to our experiences. And that's often 6 months, a year-old data. A lot of times at our Isaac meetings, it's very old information. And I know part of your vision and goal, which I really bought into immediately, was the ability to have, if we're able to self-report, to analyze that data very quickly and look at trends from our own information, de-identified, but have true information from claims. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's something.
No, yeah, Patrick, that's exactly what our calling card is on the hospital side. So, and we're bringing that, like I said, to IDA into the post-acute because you're right. If you're lucky, you'll get 6-month-old data, but more than likely it's 12+ months old. But if we're able to self-report, aggregate that, collect it, and start to analyze it, it makes a lot more sense when you are trying to advocate for something to have real-time data. When I mean real-time, we're talking 45 days old. We're going to be able to quickly do that. And having the relationship with the folks in the DC area gives us an insight and an inroad, and David could help us with this with the federal government also. So I think there's a lot of different things at play, but we're not going to try to bite off more than we can chew. But we're gonna master some of these things, and we're going to focus on the data first and the GPO and the education. And I think we're going to provide a really, really nice offering. So the more we can get into this membership, the more data we can collect across the state, the more powerful that'll make us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, I'll just sort of briefly go through the things that you and I both know, but we'll make sure members are as clear as we can make it in a few minutes. But sort of as the strategic alliance definition states, both of our entities are going to retain full independence and autonomy. Our mission at TPA, as I know your mission doesn't change, just reminding folks here, as I said earlier, our mission is exclusive to IDA supports here in Pennsylvania. There are no corporate or governance changes. Everything we're talking about is delivered through a service agreement between us and Nick. And you've seen the dues policy changes. And as I said, we're collecting the dues. So we're buying some services that we've described. We're getting all that added value. And Nick and the Center for Healthcare Solutions are really referring, even from their own members, dues to be paid and collected through TPA. So it's really a great matchup, really excited about talking more. So I'm sure members have questions. As soon as Kristen is able to join us, we'll go to Kristen, but I know we're looking for her by the bottom of the hour. But Nick, we'll bring you back. We'll talk at your convenience and set something up and offer a workshop to our members, your members, And we really look forward to big things here going forward, beginning with, starting the new year. So thanks again, Nick. Really appreciate your time today.
Likewise. Thank you, Patrick. Have a great weekend.
Okay, you as well. Okay, so we'll give you a chance to ask some questions at our next session. We will very soon put that together and we'll do some more follow-up and get more information out on this. But I want to go into some of the next agenda items. We did have quite a bit of information. You're going to hear from, hopefully, at length and very sufficient detail, have the opportunity to answer and have answered and ask your questions on selective contracting. We're guessing by now most people have heard about that, but I do want to go over a little bit of an overview. Before we do that, I want to make sure that we cover a few things that are rather important otherwise. So IDA Technology Survey was put out, I believe this came out on April 17th. There was a couple of week window for providers to answer some questions related to the technology usage across the state. And we've talked about this a little bit. This is really an offshoot of the technology task force and the work group that Craig and I, many members probably here today, that we co-chair with Ben Loudermilk from the PA Assistive Technology Foundation, and we report to ODP monthly. We had really asked ODP for their help in disseminating a survey where we could get baseline data on the use originally around remote supports and assistive technology, because particularly in remote supports, if it's being done in a residential setting, ODP does not have claims data on that because it is bundled into the residential rate. So for some of the initiatives that we were looking at within the task force and within our work group specifically, which is strategic partnerships and funding, we really wanted to enhance and target adoption rates as aggressively as we could, but we needed to have the baseline data. So we want to encourage everybody to please complete the survey. It is due by 4 p.m. today. So Craig, I think you'll put the link out if you haven't already. I know we've done an announcement. I think we have a reminder to push it out again to remind all members, everybody on our mailing list, if you have the opportunity to do this. We originally fashioned it as a survey that could also be answered by family members and people who are receiving services. It did get a bit complicated, so for now at least, ODP has put this out through the provider listservs. We do want to see information across the board, but for our work and our initiatives with the task force, it's really critically important we get as much good information as we can, upon which we'll build upon in terms of targeting what level of adoption and increase in adoption for technology that we think is reasonable this year. So information sharing and advisory committee updates. I'll go through a couple of things. It was a very interesting meeting, not just because of selective contracting, the things that we'll talk about here momentarily, but there were a few other items that I'll get into. And we also had information from the budget that, since we met last, Rick Smith was here last month. The Blue Book had come out just that day, I believe. The budget hearings have happened. Kristen covered some information on the budget at the Isaac meeting last week. So we have a little bit of information to share with you on that as well. Adult Protective Services regulations are out for public comment. The Adult Protective Services Act is now, I believe, if not over, close to a decade old. The regulations have been forthcoming forever. They are out for public comment. We are interested if you as members have any concerns or interest in making comment. If you want to submit them to us, we will submit them with our recommendations and comments. At this point, I'm probably leaning toward just pointing out that with the work of last year of the Abuse Neglect Registry Task Force and new recommendations that would in many ways require revisions and changes to existing regulation and statute already, that we would probably just call out, we would like to see those recommendations be adopted because we would believe that's a lot stronger, and that has very recent stakeholder input, including from TPA. I thank the members of the TPA work group who assembled to help look at the task force recommendations and make their own recommendations. And this happened across the state with all associations and all stakeholder groups. But if you do have comments that you want to make on those, we encourage you to do so. We've put the link out. I think we'll do that here again before the end of the meeting in the chat. So we encourage you to take a look. And if you have anything you'd like to say, we'd be happy to evaluate those comments for our submission as well. So Craig, if you want to jump to quickly a couple of slides here. that we'll talk about. That's actually the link there. So this is what ODP put out on the 17th. So if you are able to take a moment today before 4 p.m., it's a very brief survey. We did it even though it's now covering, in addition to what I said, it is covering the video monitoring, and it is covering the use or provision of teleservices. So it should be a very robust report of information from the provider community on what's going on with technology. And it's information that we're absolutely going to use in our work group efforts and with the task force. So please take a moment to complete the survey. Again, it only takes, as it says here, 5 to 10 minutes. It's pretty simple click through. So we'd like to see everybody participate in that if you can, if you haven't already. So next up, Craig, this is just basically framing. The governor put his budget together, announced it on March the 7th. Next couple of slides, Craig, you can just kind of hit quickly. This is where we, at the bottom of the slide, there was some discussion about IDA rate increases, which was really sort of a carry forward. We went into this in a lot of detail last meeting with Rick Smith. Out of this was really sort of, if you go to next slide, Craig, actually it's at the bottom of that previous slide, the $11 million, there was some reference to community participation supports. That really wasn't called out until a couple of days later when the secretary stated it. And again, I would say it probably wasn't terribly clear then either, but we did get confirmation of the extension of the rates. So go ahead, Craig, you can go to the next slide now. What you see here is really pretty much what I'm going to show you from the Isaac slide. So the 17.5 million to reduce the waiting list. If you go on, I think it's a little more clear than it is actually on the governor's slide. So advance one more, Craig. We showed everybody kind of the individual lines that comprise what's going on with the waiver program. And you can advance from here too, Craig. So last week, so the April 18th meeting of the Isaac, these are the slides that Kristen used to really convey exactly what is now going on. So after Blue Book, after hearings, then we're still not in the place where we have an approved budget. That doesn't happen until the legislature weighs in and approves the budget, sometime hopefully between now and July 1st. But this really does lay out pretty much the same specifics. The specialty health assessment and coordination was talked a lot at the Isaac meeting. Again, there's $700 million in the budget for this. It's basically for the development of teleservices that would support people in their own homes, families, DSPs, to have an available teleservice resource for basically medical needs. This would be system-wide. ODP has done an evaluation of this, so there'll be more to talk about on that. The other initiatives include life sharing without day, the development of a residential needs group 5, which would have corresponding fee schedule rates incorporated with that. And Kristen called out a couple of things. The fact that the investment from ARPA funds into fee schedule rates was indeed carried forward. Of course, that was expected. That's why we had advocated that we wanted to see ARPA money go into the fee schedule rate so they could indeed be carried forward with the fee schedule. But it is fair, very much so, to call out the fact that that did occur. ODP did not pull money back in the new budget year, did not change the fee schedule. So that is certainly a plus. The other things there that were mentioned, we also called out earlier the HTBS augmentation account. And we've shown the amount of money. It's about $12 million of savings that's going to move from state centers to IDA community services. And that's, when you heard Marisol speak earlier, that's largely what they're looking at in terms of any housing initiatives, to use that money for that. Again, we're advocating take all that money and put it into rates so that it stays in the system going forward. But we also understand there's other initiatives and not everything will go into rates as much as we may ask for that. So the waiver amendments, rates, waiver caps, supplemental payments. This is just kind of a laundry list of things that Kristen covered. The remote supports and residential services, the teleservices that I mentioned earlier, a lot of discussion about the rollout of that. Again, these are things that are in the budget. You can expect they won't be enacted until the budget is approved, but there's going to be plenty of work that goes into that. Craig, and I know you were at this meeting, so I want you to feel free to weigh in. I only grabbed a couple of these slides from the Isaac meeting, but I did want to make sure we called out. We said this before as well. So with the things like the extension of the temporary CPS rates and transportation trip rates, with needs group 5, some of these other changes, having a life sharing without day rate. All of this will require ODP to publish in the Pennsylvania Bulletin revised fee schedule rates. That will then require comment on those fee schedule rates. So there'll be a bit of time before things can be enacted. So even once the budget is approved, rates will be published. That's why they're talking about the teleservices for telehealth, probably rolling that out in January of 2024. So Craig, I thought I saw a couple questions pop in. It doesn't look like Kristen has joined us yet. So we probably have time for a couple of questions. And if you want to go to the next selective contracting slides, maybe we can field a couple of questions, and then I'll try to set things up for Kristen. Craig, I don't know if you're there, but there is I see Kristen has arrived right on cue. So Kristen, if you need a moment to get organized and settled in, just let me know. I was going to, the only slide that I really intended to show our members here today, as you can see, is this timeline slide that was announced at last week's ISAC. So Kristen, I know you've prepared some slides that you're going to go over with us. So Craig, I'll have you either go forward or go back. It was just sort of a bullet point list of items to kind of set things up for our members. So Kristen, are you ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, well, welcome. Sorry for the
no worries.
So backtrack just a second, Craig. I just want to say, really as much for Kristen's benefit, because I did not want to sort of trample over the things that I know she's already covered and if there were going to be any changes. So, my intent was really just kind of frame things, and I'll say a couple of things here. Kristen and I have had the chance to touch base a little bit. And of course, I was able to catch up with everything that's already been communicated, both the slide deck, both everything that was said, if the discussion at the ISAC. So these are just some high level principles. I know some of the things that you may have heard or seen already. I know just due to time, Kristen doesn't have the opportunity to talk probably so much in depth about some of the things, but I did list them here. I'm really not going to go through these, but you can kind of read the list. We'll put the deck out later, maybe throughout the course of any Q&A if there's time. We can backtrack on some of the things if you have any questions just about framing the concept. But I know that nobody will do that better than Kristen Ahrens. So welcome again, Kristen. We'll bring you in. And thanks for being here today. We appreciate your outreach to come and meet with our members. So we'll turn it over to you.
Great. And you have the slide deck for me? Perfect. You can go ahead to the next one. I do want to make sure that we leave some time for questions, and we've got 45 minutes. So I will kind of run through this. And Patrick, I saw some of the questions that you sent, so I'll try to address those as we go here. But to start, I just want to remind everybody, we started the sort of discussion about selective contracting in that term. You may have first heard back when we were proposing all of the initiatives with the ARPA funding that we put out in 2021. DHS published the plan. I forget, I think total there were probably about 50 initiatives. 14 of those were ODP initiatives. And one of the things that we had requested funding for and the federal government did approve is to hire a consultant to help us take a look at some different options available to us in the Medicaid authorities, take a look at what other states were doing in terms of better management tools. So we did use ARPA funding to do that. And what you're seeing here is some of the sort of discovery and what we've come out intending to do. And I can start by saying what problem were we trying to solve? Like, why are we having this discussion at all? And I think at the core of this, this is really about improving the quality of services within our system. And to kind of break it down, I think that falls into 5 kind of general areas that we think are challenging the quality of services. So One is that we increasingly in our service system are seeing people with higher acuity of support needs. We certainly are also seeing an increase in poorly performing providers in our system. And that is sort of coupled with what I would say is we don't have the greatest set of management tools in terms of managing to quality and frankly, even managing to compliance in terms of how we, the tools we have to support performance. Also exacerbated by the fact that we, under the current agreement with the federal government, under the current authorities that we use, we also have really limited ability in terms of how we can pay providers and structure payments. We pushed extremely hard, and it was, this was innovative for our current service model under fee for service to get those life sharing outcome-based payments. That's not, that was something newer to CMS and not something that was really being done in that way. And so we have some real limitations in terms of our current Medicaid agreement in terms of who and how the provider pool is managed, and certainly some real restrictions around how we can pay, which definitely limits our ability to pay for the kind of systems outcomes and individual outcomes that we're interested in. I think another challenge is that we have, we've got some really nice policies and procedures and some fantastic training and principles around embedding the person-centered planning and life course into our service system. And we serve people of all ages across a lifespan, and we have to get better at life course planning. Life course planning is the core of it, is anticipatory planning over a lifespan. And we have asked our supports coordination to do this. We have tried to embed this in our system and essentially layer it on top of a really complex system. So we've sort of overburdened our supports coordination with a complex system to navigate, 30 some services, multiple waivers, a waiting list, targeted supports management outside of that. And then, we also give them a 20-some-year-old IT system that is supposed to help them manage in that. So really some tremendous challenges, I think, in terms of trying to get some of the focus in terms of individual planning where it needs to be, with a lot of constraints and restraints around that. And again, our payment model here, we're talking about, we pay for every 15-minute units. There's no ability to really kind of align that with the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. I'm going to go back a little bit, because one of the things, so we're doing this work trying to understand kind of the Medicaid authorities available, what other states are doing, and in the backdrop here, related to what I've just shared in terms of quality, we had back when I became deputy in 2018, we had already started a residential strategic thinking group that identified a number of issues. When I was out talking with individuals and families, I did a big listening tour when I started as deputy. I did something like 18 sessions. The consistent thing I heard at every one of them was about quality of supports coordination. So we have had projects sort of underway. We've got strategic planning documents and identified the domains that we need to be working on through those work groups. Those are external work groups. And what you see here is really sort of a culmination of a lot of that work coming together. All right, so go ahead to the next one. I'll talk a little bit in some detail about when I'm talking about the acuity of the population changing. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the quality things that we're seeing. But in terms of acuity, a few things to note here. I imagine this feels very right to all of you. just in terms of who you are seeing come to you in need of services, or who has been with you in need of services, and they, with aging and whatnot, their issues have become more complex. So certainly what we are seeing is an increase in acuity of support needs. And some of this is driven by the populations that we're serving. We have, added new eligibility categories, including, children with medically complex conditions that by its very nature means we're serving a more complex population. We are talking about children with some kind of technology dependence here. So you've got that. And then I think we have an aging population. And we're certainly doing better in terms of early intervention and all the supports coming out of school. So the people coming to us, particularly for residential, have higher acuity of support needs. And they are aging into higher acuity of support needs. So over time, we've gone from mid-20s in terms of needs groups in residential when we started looking at that, to we are now at 36% of people in residential are in needs group 4. And we know what this means is to meet the needs of this population, and I don't see this trend line decreasing. To meet the needs of this population, we have to continue to get better at really wrapping clinical supports into our service system so that we can meet the needs of this population. All right, next slide. So just to put some numbers to some of the quality concerns, and I know I've had conversations with a number of you about this and sort of the workforce, how much workforce issues drive some of this. But to put some numbers to this, and this is, I know there was a comment that this is, during the pandemic. I can tell you this, when ODP brought licensing back in 2017, this trend has continued. So I've got data here from 19, so pre-pandemic through pandemic, but this trend line had started prior to the pandemic and prior to 2019 as well. So what we continue to see in residential service is this increase in enforcement actions. And so much so that we have, and I think that we've actually increased this since I put this slide together. We actually have 17 situations right now where we, in addition to licensing actions, we have also taken programmatic actions to say, you can't open new service locations, you can't have new admissions until this is sorted out. The other sort of data point here is this increase just in the average number of violations that we are seeing. And again, this preceded the 2019, it preceded the pandemic. This has been occurring. It's definitely been sort of accelerated, I feel like, during this last couple of years. And I think, I don't have a study to tell you this. I, like you, suspect that some of that definitely has to do with workforce as well. But the couple of the kind of specific examples to share what we're talking about here, because we are talking about really basic functions in terms of residential service. We are talking about medication errors. We are talking about failure to provide health services. So some really basics. The top 5 violation inspections, Karen, I can't do that off the top of my head. I can tell you that med admin and failure to provide health services are a couple of them. But I can certainly, if that's important, I can certainly go back to our licensing staff and get that. And this has been pretty consistent. I put a picture here for those of you who may not, this is pre-pandemic and the before times. We did actually, through the Residential Strategic Thinking Group, we did actually publish a report on improving the quality of residential services. So sort of identifying some of the areas of concern and then some of the practices that we wanted to implement. We've done quite a lot of that, and still, we're still in this place of having a lot of struggle with residential service. So this, what we are talking about here today in terms of selective contracting is specifically to address that. All right, next slide. In terms of supports coordination, same thing. We are seeing, and again, I think there is an element of workforce that is at the root of this. We do have, I want to say, about 26% vacancy rate for supports coordination. So pretty similar to what we're seeing in terms of direct support, and that obviously creates phenomenal pressures within supports coordination. But again, some of these quality issues certainly preceded the pandemic and those kinds of vacancy rates. This is an area where, I heard quite a bit from stakeholders about quality issues. We've got 5 or 6 different domains that we had identified that we wanted to be working on, and we have to do more here. So some just concrete examples in terms of what we're seeing is in terms of basic functioning of supports coordination is individual monitoring, right? Absolute basic function. We should be doing that routinely, should have, solid practices around that. It is a core and necessary function for basic health and safety for service delivery. We have 2 regions that are performing at one central region at 78%, and Southeast at 75% of adhering to the requirements related to individual monitoring. Another core function is how are we responding in terms of incident management, in how, SC's ability to identify and report abuse, neglect, and exploitation, then monitoring subsequent corrective action plans with providers following up on those plans. Our rates of performance here were 41%, 85%, and 83% respectively. And again, these are absolutely core functions. We have got to improve this. And then I've got a note here that's sort of a more general comment that we're hearing quite a bit from stakeholders, and I would say kind of across stakeholder groups, is sorry, Karen, the other 2 regions are actually above that, not below it. The other kind of general complaint that we're hearing, and again, across the board, this is individuals and families, this is advocates, I've also heard this from providers, is that as much progress as we had made in terms of inclusion and supporting people in integrated ways, that we are definitely at risk here of people being in the community but not of it and not integrated in it. That there's that activities, even though they might be occurring out in the community, they're not doing anything to actually support people to be integrated. So definitely a sort of a continual concern and complaint about the quality of service provision related to that. All right, next one. So we hired a contractor to support us to do 2 things. We used Mercer. We ultimately used Mercer to do this with us. We wanted 2 things. One, how could we, under Medicaid, what authorities are available to us? How could we have some different tools to get at payment where we can align with outcomes? How can we manage a provider pool to quality instead of compliance? And so the contractor Mercer supported us to examine all of the available authorities, and then we also had asked for an environmental scan in the IDD, home and community-based service space. What's happening? Who's using what? How are states managing these services differently? So did this big scan across the country to take a look at that, and largely IDD programs, IDD, home and community-based service programs, are fee-for-service under 1915C, just like we do here in Pennsylvania. So that is absolutely the predominant model for IDD, home and community-based services. The states that are using different authorities, they're other than fee for service and traditional 1915C. There are some 3 other states that use selective contracting. There are states that use specialized plans. We are one of them. Our ACAP program is considered a specialized plan. But you've got some other states that are doing that. Arkansas does that. North Carolina's been trying. They just delayed their implementation again. New York's got a home health model. So there's a little bit out there. And Tennessee has a specialized plan. That's probably the most well-known is Tennessee's plan. And then there's one state that uses what's called an administrative services organization model. That state is Georgia, and essentially Georgia has a lot of the functions that the state would otherwise do. They have this administrative services organization doing that sort of at the back end for them. So took a look at what was happening in those other states and got this good understanding of what the different authorities were available to us. All right, next slide. So where we landed after all of this is that we intend to pursue 2 1915 B4 selective contracting waivers. And we intend to do that for the IDA waivers, so Consolidated Community Living, Person, Family Directed Support Waiver, for 2 services. So for residential services and supports coordination. So sort of, obviously those are large service areas for us, but sort of narrowly using this 1915 B4 selective contracting authority. And you can go ahead to the next one and I'll explain sort of technically what that means. So B4 we use in Pennsylvania. You would be, B4 is one of, under the Social Security statute, 1915C is how you describe a population that you want to give some optional services to outside of the state plan. You describe the population, you describe the services, you describe the providers. So that's 1915C. We're all familiar with that. Any of you who have read the waiver applications from start to finish, you will recognize this sort of form. 1915B in Social Security statute outlines different management authorities that can be coupled with 1915Cs. And there's B1, 2, 3, 4. In Pennsylvania, we use Community Health Choices uses, I want to say 1, 2, and 4. Behavioral Health Choices uses 1, 2, and 4. And our Physical Health Choices also uses, I believe, 1, 2, and 4. So ODP is looking at, again, really narrowly, just looking at using the B4. And what this means is we would waive what's called freedom of choice, which sounds terrible. But what essentially freedom of choice, the definition from the feds is any willing and qualified provider, which that term we're familiar with. So we would be asking to waive that beneficiaries of the service have the choice of every willing and qualified provider. And what we would do instead is narrow that pool to, we would, ODP is committed and DHS is committed to ensuring people still have choice. So we would need to build a network and have a network that ensures choice in every geographic area of any services we put into this. And right now we are only interested in supports coordination and residential services. So our commitment would be that we would still have choice of providers in any geographic area, but we would limit this. So that front door essentially would be closed unless we don't have an adequate network. So we will have to assure the feds and continually prove that we have an adequate network of providers for these 2 service areas. Essentially, we would only open the door to new applicants when and if we don't have an adequate network of providers. Okay. Go ahead to the next slide. I'm trying to pull this up so I can kind of do questions as we go here. They were popping up. Okay, that's a long one, so I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to keep going. I'll come back to it. Okay, so why? What are the advantages? Kind of what struck us about this as an option to address some of the quality issues that I just referenced. So first of all, these 1915 B4s can be used with 1915 Cs, and CHC is a great example. OLTL took a bunch, I think 4 waivers, combined it into one 1915 C. It is managed using those B authorities in the Social Security statute. So we can use it with C without, I don't frankly even anticipate a ton of change to our C waiver to do this. I mean, I think our service definitions themselves are quite solid. So I don't see a big change there, and you can use this to manage those C waivers. The other thing is it gets us away from every willing and qualified provider. Every willing and qualified provider over time has certainly provided a lot of choice to individuals. At this point, we have a lot of providers in the door. We have over 400 residential providers. We got about 68 supports coordination organizations in the Commonwealth. And we spend a lot of time managing providers who get themselves in the door and do not know what they're doing. So we spend a lot of time sort of at that end of administration and program management, not at the quality end where we would rather spend time. Get out of the every willing and qualified, but we've got to assure that network of providers that people have access. It will we will have to clarify our expectations around those provider requirements, the characteristics, and all of the quality and care standards. The other thing incredibly attractive to us is we can move away from just this straight fee for service every 15 minutes or day units. We have the ability to start using alternative payment models and start aligning payment with quality service provision. So we really want the ability to do some things differently with pay and align that with outcomes. The other thing that it allows for is we can really build in the kind of continuity of care expectations that we need. And for residential in particular, that's going to be absolutely critical. This isn't just a service provider, it is where someone lives as well. So I think we're going to have to, this is one of the areas of implementation and the criteria that we establish that we are going to want to pay very great care to ensure that we are not creating disruptions and destabilization. Rather, the idea here is let's lift the quality of the provider network and the provider pool to meet that care and avoid those kinds of service disruptions. All right, next one. So when I say residential, I mean the full suite of residential would be included in this. So this would be supported living, life sharing, unlicensed reshab, and licensed reshab. We would expect that a preferred provider, so part of what you can do with selective contracting is we can have sort of tiers of providers, and you can think Keystone Stars. We would look to create a preferred provider pool. There's obviously going to be more than one tier of providers here, but to have a preferred provider pool that does, and one of the requirements to be in that preferred provider pool is you support the whole continuum of residential services. And this is for a few reasons. One, these services are preferred. There's higher satisfaction by individuals and families, supported living and life sharing. They're less restrictive, and they require less traditional staff to do it. So the little, anywhere we can sort of lessen burden on workforce issues, we want to do that. So, and finally, less expensive. So less restrictive, less expensive, preferred options in terms of supported living and life sharing, and less demand in terms of traditional workforce. So That is, the plan is to include the full suite and to have a provider, a tier of that provider pool, where that is one of the requirements, is that you do the full continuum. All right, next one. And supports coordination. Supports coordination, this, same supports coordination, same locating, coordinating, monitoring. The thing to note here is that we would look to include not just the waiver case management, but targeted supports management as well. We have about 20,000 people that receive targeted supports management. Our SCOs tend to do both. I'm not sure we even have an SCO that just does waiver supports coordination. So I think we want to make sure we have that all under the same kind of management expectations and payment expectations. So we would look to pull in both our TSM and waiver supports coordination into that. All right, next one. So the objectives, and again, I started with, like, we've got to address some of these big systems issues through some better management, payment arrangements. And the objective here is to improve quality. And I think we can do that by hitting these two pivotal areas that have been, these were very clearly identified. I feel like at the time I became deputy, and that's only increased. In terms of how clear that is. We do that by focusing on some pivotal areas. We do that by establishing metrics that helps us develop this preferred provider pool. We do this by aligning payment to outcomes and by using pay for performance. One of the questions that we were sort of pressed to answer was, how do you know? How will you know if you've done it? And I think we'll know because we'll have performance metrics that are showing us that we've got better retention of DSPs, that we've got better rates of employment, that we've got more people living in supported living and life sharing, that we've got more people self-directing their services that are reporting higher satisfaction because supports coordination's done a great job of kind of working through all of the services and models that are available. We've got lower inpatient care. We can establish what these performance metrics are, and I think we're going to know to some degree, are we successful or not through those. We will also know by satisfaction. So we said, one of the things that we'll know is in July of 2025, if we look at a number of areas of satisfaction related to residential, where individuals and families are going to report higher satisfaction. Same thing for supports coordination a year out after we've started that. We would see the same thing in terms of satisfaction across a number of satisfaction measures. All right, next one. Drivers for these objectives. So kind of what's behind this around quality, we want to look at things that support workforce retention and recruitment. I think one of the things that we want to look at is, to be a preferred provider, is there sort of a benchmark for how many staff, how many DSPs are credentialed? And then, is that across the board? Is that just for preferred providers? But I think we want to look at staff credentialing. We want to look at the expectations for how behavioral support is integrated into a residential service. What is the expectation? How do we measure that? How do we look at that to know that that's happening? We want to look at how technology is being used and incorporated into service provision. And again, this is improve the quality of life for individuals, support people to be more independent. But again, this is wherever we can reduce reliance on traditional staff. We will always need them. We have this residential program that has increasing need for clinical support and a population that will come to us with increasing acuity of need. So let's put those resources where we really need them, and where we don't, let's provide some relief. So I think in terms of some of these drivers, I think we can get there by trying to hit these as performance measures and standards for these tiers of different providers. All right, next slide. All right, so program changes. So, we're talking here about selective contracting. Quite a few of these other program change areas will be incorporated into this. I've already talked about some of the workforce strategy, the support strategies. Are we going to look at credentialing? What are the other training? What are we doing around recruitment and retention? And I think we can build some of that into selective contracting. Improving professional standards, same thing, right? I think that can be built in there, and we're obviously doing that in other ways across the system, supported by some of the ARPA funding. Focus on QA, looking at practice versus just policy. This is looking at outcomes, not just policy, not just procedure. We've got, again, I think we'll build some of this in because we will have quality metrics that we're looking for, not just compliance with regulation here. And this is a drive that's going to also be outside and beyond anything we do with selective contracting. The federal government has started in earnest now to be in conversation with states around that core measure set. I know I did a session for you guys a few months ago about that. There is now activity at the federal government level with states who use money follows the person to, I think, get us moving on adopting core measure sets. So that is looking at outcomes, not measuring essentially procedure. We've been trying to do that in QA&I as much as possible as well. So that will happen within and without and across our system. The other piece, again, not dependent on selective contracting, but I think will support it, is the implementation of our enterprise case management solution. Finally, the last thing I note here is we want to use this selective contracting, the opportunity to do pay for performance and to pay differently also means I think we can have this conversation about financial assumptions that we are making in order to support capacity building, to provide responsive services to people who come to us with this higher acuity of need. We as a system have to figure out how to not just pay providers for what you did yesterday, but have a payment mechanism so that there is some capacity. So when we have a person who has, who is in crisis, that is unexpected, that we can be more responsive to that than, hang on, I've got a willing provider, but they have to find a home, they have to train all the staff, they have to put all of that together. And I get it, that's what we paid for. That's what we get, that's what we paid for. We have to do better than that to have a responsive system to individuals and families. So we want to kind of build that into how we are thinking about the provider assumptions here and the financial assumptions. All right, last one. Make sure we've got some time for questions here. What's staying the same? ODP will still be managing this. We will be using the 1915 V4 authority ourselves. Counties will keep in their same role. Individuals and families are still going to have choice of providers. What changes? We have these B4s. ODP will be procuring a vendor with an external administrative vendor to help us at the back end very specifically with data collection, analysis, and reporting. We have a great data analysis division. We do not have the resources within it to do the work to do this right and to do it well. So we will be doing that procurement. I know I had a question about timing related to that. That is something, as soon as we started talking about that, we started those wheels because for any of you who know the Commonwealth's procurement process, it is protracted. So we have been kind of moving that along with the hope that we would be in this position now to be doing that. Payment, we will have the ability to tie payment to quality outcomes. And the other thing here I want to note is we also think for this preferred provider pool, if we have providers that are consistently meeting quality standards, that we think we have some opportunity to reduce or streamline some of the other regulatory oversight. So right now, doesn't matter, all providers get the same licensing inspection, you get the same QA and I assessment. If we have assurances that providers are meeting these other quality standards, I think that gives us an opportunity to say, we don't need to do the same. We can do something that is more streamlined for that group of providers. So we welcome that as another opportunity that this could pose. All right, final slides here. Timelines, I think, Patrick, it sounds like you went over this already, so I don't need to. Is that?
I just had flashed it up, really. I didn't cover it at all. So
Okay.
probably we just
Yeah, so we're looking at getting this RFP for the vendor out because we want the vendor in place before, because we're going to need to have a smooth data collection, analysis reporting. We need that set up before we get going with this. So we're working on that procurement very actively right now, and then hope to execute and implement the residential services between July and December of 2024, and then a year later do the same with supports coordination. All right, next slide. What happens next? We're going to get a concept paper out for public comment. We will do a bunch of public sessions to take feedback verbally. We will also be taking that in writing. There are work groups. We will pull together some of our existing work groups, probably with some additional people pulled in, because we need to nail down some of the specific metrics that we want to use for this. I think we've got some global ideas around, that behavioral support, around credentialing, around things like that, but we need to nail down specifically what those are, and we're definitely going to use stakeholder work groups to help us get that detail out. So there will be two opportunities, one concept paper. Second, we will also have to submit to CMS what formally we're doing. So there will be other larger public comment opportunities those 2 times. All right, let me take questions. I think I tried to answer the ones you sent ahead of time as I was speaking.
Kristen, while you read through those, and we'll try to help you read or capture some of them in general, I want to open our poll. And you mentioned the state Medicaid director quality measure set reference. We talked about bringing you back even. We'd been talking about doing a workshop or a series of sessions on basically what we would have called managed care readiness preparedness. So we'd like our members to kind of give us some feedback. Now we would probably zero in specifically on selective contracting. So again, we could talk about whether you could come back and talk about that. I don't know how much of an influencer you think that will be in terms of some of this. And we hear that your concept paper is coming out. But really just to hear from you as members, if we set up a series of workshops to kind of explore some of this, both from what's the concept look like, some of these questions we'll try to tackle in the time that Kristen has left. But thanks, it looks like we're getting a lot of responses and a pretty high hit rate on the yes. So we'll have more to come. And Craig, if you're able to share the results at some point here. But Kristen, did you have a question you wanted to tackle first, or is it helpful if I kind of read through some of them?
I'm still reading through these. There's a comment. There's a question that's pretty specific to a provider about their getting approved, their enrollment. Is it proposed that a provider that provides excellent quality of licensed residential will be able to obtain selective status if they do not also provide supported living and life sharing? Correct. We are as the concept is now, a preferred provider. To be in a preferred provider pool, there would be an expectation of providing that full continuum of services. Will the provider be able to use the credentialing and trainings that they consider appropriate for their population, or will the process be prescriptive? So Rita, that's a great question. And one of the things that we have been hoping that this time period with the ARPA supplemental funds that can help with credentialing would help us get to is what credentialing do we want to adopt? What does the Commonwealth want to adopt for credentialing? So I know there's a lot of NADD and a lot of NADSP, the e-badge. Those are the primary credentialing that have come out of the ARPA funds that providers applied for. So I sort of imagine that's where we will be going, but I don't have an answer for you today. I think, we're open to that, but I think some of the principles that it seems like we have some stakeholder agreement on are portability of certification would be wonderful. If we have portable certificates, then a provider isn't having to do a lot of that retraining. Like, again, you can think about some relief there that the portability of certification, like a CNA does for a person. So I think there's certainly interest in some prescriptiveness to that. Maybe it's a list of available credentials, but I don't have the answer to that today. How do you see selective contracting impacting the waiting list? Also, do you have a time frame for when the concept paper will be available? Concept paper will be out before June 30th. And in terms of impacting the waiting list, I don't imagine that there will be sort of an immediate impact on the waiting list. I think over time, if we can, as a system, and again, this is quality of supports coordination, this is really using that full package of services, not the heavy reliance that we have on traditional day, traditional residential programs. I think the more that we can support individuals and families using that other full array of services, the more our per person cost decreases, and we have seen that over time. Then I think that will long-term impact the sustainability of our system, including hopefully eliminating the waiting list. By itself, this will not eliminate the waiting list, though. Do you see it overcoming the direct workforce crisis? Do I believe selective contracting will assist in overcoming the direct workforce crisis? No, by itself, there is no one thing that we can do to overcome the workforce crisis. But I think we have to build into this ways to support workforce recruitment and retention. And I think we can do that. So I think this is a tool and this is a mechanism to help us with that for all those reasons I said. I think we can use it in ways that reduce reliance on traditional workforce, especially with quality supports coordination. I think we can, if we have credentialed workforce, we start tying pay to credentialing, all of these things that professionalize the workforce. I think all those things that help stabilize, yes, those will help, but in and of itself, this is not the answer to the workforce crisis. I wish there were one answer. Okay. I'm going to have to go in 1 minute, so I'm trying to pick a question here that.
Kristen, maybe what we'll do is we can kind of capture these and shoot them
Okay.
request on time. I was going to say, if you can stay a little bit extra time, we'd gladly have you. Maybe just to wrap up in the minutes that we have. So we didn't get a chance to really get into how this would affect rate and investment. Certainly, you don't even have to react, but certainly an inflationary adjustment that would kind of get us current going into the new year, given your timeline. Something we'll continue to advocate for, have the conversation about. I mean, we're thinking certainly more money to get into the system to implement this, the better. And I think we have good arguments in terms of inflation. Inflation since the fee schedule went into place, the last year in this first quarter is up about 7.2% just since the fee schedule went into effect. And I know you've got to run. Maybe we can catch up further. We also
I do have to run, and let me say one thing that I can say that's specifically related to selective contracting and what I just shared with you and what is in these slides. So pay for performance is additive, right? If we are looking at pay for performance, we are talking about something is additive. When I say we have to have financial assumptions that support capacity building, that is also additive. That is, we're not paying for that today, and we get what we pay for. So, I think there's a couple of ways in which this concept in and of its nature is additive. So I hope that's helpful in terms of, some of the rest of that. I can't really speak to that today, but I hope that's at least helpful.
Well, for clarity then, Kristen, are you saying that some of these things there would be a budget addition because they're additive services that would be implementation costs to support that, not a zero-sum game where we have what we have in the system and that has to be redistributed?
I don't see this occurring in an environment of zero sum. I think when you talk about pay for performance and you talk about, we have financial assumptions that assume that we have some capacity to take on what's coming, that you are talking about something additive.
Okay,
Yep.
good. I know you've got to run. We'll follow up
I
with you
do.
on the
Thank
CIS
you.
letter as well. So thanks for being here. We'll touch base when we can.
We
Thanks so
will
much.
get a response to this letter out. I should be able to have that back to you next week.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks very much,
All right,
Kristen.
thank you. I'm glad this worked out. I appreciate being able to talk with you and your members.
Appreciate having you here.
All right, have a good weekend, all.
Okay, talk to you soon. All right, thanks everyone. We appreciate you being here today, adjusting your schedule. Our thanks to Kristen, all of our guests here today. We'll follow up. We will submit the questions you have provided via the chat or the Q&A to Kristen, and along with follow-up, whatever we distribute out to members from this meeting, you can look for a follow-up there as well. So any questions, please be in touch. Everyone, thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. We'll see you soon. Take care.